You're listening to Psych with Mike. For more episodes or to connect with the show with comments, ideas, or to be a guest, go to www.psychwithmike.com. Follow the show on Twitter @PsychWithMike or like the Facebook page @PsychWithMike. Now, here's Psych with Mike.
Welcome into the Psych with Mike Library. This is Dr. Michael Mahan, and I am actually here solo today, but not really solo. I actually have a very special guest. So, very special guest, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Jaden Satenstein. I am a senior at WashU in St. Louis, and I am in Dr. Mahan's class. So we're going to talk about my midterm project that I worked on a few weeks ago.
And what happens is that I give students an opportunity to submit their knowledge acquisition. So that's a pedagogy term for did I teach you something? The ability to report that back, which is how people get graded. But I believe that people should be able to do that in a way that is fitting with their learning style. And one of the options that I give students is a podcast. And when I get really, really great podcasts, then I always want to share those with my audience. And so Jaden did an excellent interview with, who'd you do your interview with?
Yeah, so I talked to Dr. Gladys Smith. She is a trauma counselor actually at the WashU Med School, but she also does pro bono work and she does like private practice work. And I was really interested in talking to her because of just the kind of variety of experiences she's had, but also the different backgrounds she's had. Like she's gotten, I think, 5 degrees and she worked, in the Navy. So definitely had such a diversity of experience. And
I was talking to you before we turned the mics on that it was amazing to me or a little bit surprising to me that Dr. Smith had a very similar, I haven't been in the military, but other than that, a very similar trajectory to her career as I had in my career, both being at Webster and now at Washington University in St. Louis, both having degrees in clinical psychology, but also having a very strong background in professional counseling. So that was really fantastic to learn about her. For you, Jaden, what was the most important thing that you got out of that interview?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it was really interesting, in this class, I think right off the bat, we learned about just the different paths you can take in counseling since, a lot of us obviously are in this class because we want to learn more about it or, curious about it as a career path. So we learned about, different degree programs and then different theoretical orientations for providing therapy. And what really interested me about her was that she's kind of combined all those different paths in a way and gone down so many different roads. So I think what I really got out of it was learning how each individual experience added to her knowledge and, her ability to practice. And I think it was really interesting to identify what all those different components were that has made her such a strong counselor.
Mm-hmm. I agree 100%. I've always said to people, and I don't know if I've said it in this class, but I say all the time, that I didn't find psychology. Psychology found me. I started taking psychology classes at St. Louis University because I was trying to pass calculus to get into the engineering school and never did pass calculus and took all the psychology classes they had. And so my advisor said, "Oh, you're a psych major." And looking back at it in retrospect, what I realize is that all of the skills that I have were congruent with a career in counseling or in psychology, but I didn't know that at the time. And it sounds to me like Dr. Smith had a very similar experience in her trajectory while she was going to school.
Mm-hmm.
So let's take a listen to your podcast, and then at the end of that, we'll come back and talk about what it sounded like.
Great.
We see therapists depicted in TV. We hear about them during mental health presentations at school or work. We sometimes even see one on a weekly basis. but most of us don't know too much about what it's actually like to pursue counseling as a profession. That's why I talked to Gladys Smith, a licensed trauma therapist at the Washington University School of Medicine, about her decades-long career in psychology. Dr. Smith is astoundingly accomplished. She holds a bachelor's degree, 2 masters, and a doctorate in psychology. She's a United States Navy veteran and constantly offers pro bono services to people throughout the St. Louis area and teaches university courses. Here's my conversation with Dr. Smith, during which we talked about everything from substance abuse counseling to ethical issues in the field to self-care.
I'd love to know what made you decide to go into counseling.
Let's see. Well, I was in the military. I actually was interested I was interested in movement therapy and psychology. So that was way before I joined the military. And so I started school in psychology, and I wanted to use movement to help people relieve any type of pain, or, trauma wasn't the end thing then. I guess it is now. But along the way, I stopped dancing for a while. So I really focused on the psychology part. And I joined the Navy back in 2000, not 2000, what am I talking about? Back in the 90s, I guess it was, late 80s and 90s. And so I was a paramedic EMT. I was what's called a hospital corpsman, and I was a field medic as well. And in working in the emergency room, all these people would come in with all these things. And I said, there's got to be something before this. And a lot of it involved alcohol. And so they have a program, the Navy's Drug and Alcohol Counseling School. So I ended up going into the Navy's Drug and Alcohol Counseling School, and I was able to, that's how I started my career in counseling. I wanted to beat them before they got to the emergency room with gunshot wounds and suicide attempts and domestic violence and all the stuff that I'd seen. So I did the substance abuse counseling. I had finished my degree when I went in, but I just decided to do another degree. And just kind of blossomed from there. And now I do somatic integrative trauma therapy.
Yeah, definitely. That's really interesting to hear about, your transition from the military into counseling and how that inspired you. And, I also saw, as you said, like, it's astounding how many different degrees you have, and like healthcare management and health science and education and a doctorate of psychology. It's really impressive. How have those various educational experiences affected how you practice today?
Well, I think that they have protected me really from burnout, because as I started out with addictions, and I worked straight addictions, and that's very, very hard because of just the population. And I think the variance of work helped me, because then the Navy had what's called it wasn't eating disorders. It was psychological condition affecting physical condition, because you couldn't have an eating disorder in the military. So I did a lot of work with eating disorder. Then the eating disorder went from working with trauma. So how the variance has helped me is that I'm able to know, I know a lot about the physical aspects of trauma and depression and anxiety that a lot of people don't even think about of the whole person. That's why I do integrative now. And I think that has helped me so much in just helping people understand the somatics of what's going on with them. And it's kept me from burnout too, I do believe, because I work with eating disorders, I've worked with men, worked with women, we're a variance of populations in a state hospital, in drug and alcohol centers, and in education. So I've been in education for almost 18, 19, it might be 20 years by now, 17, it's 20 years now, 20 years in higher ed.
Congratulations, that's awesome. And it's really interesting to hear a little bit more about your approach in counseling. In my class so far, we've covered a few different theoretical orientations like psychoanalytic and Adlerian, and we're going to move on soon to things like existential and CBT. I'm wondering how you would describe your theoretical orientation.
I would really say it is integrative, because along the way, of course, 12-step facilitation has always been a grounding force that has helped, but it has been cognitive behavioral and now somatic experiencing work, somatic psychology. So it's a combination of those things that I use with individuals. And some of the modalities that I use are DBT, EMDR, CBT, and prolonged exposure therapy.
Great. So I'd love to hear more about your role as a trauma therapist at WashU at the med school, because I'm interested to know, what is it like to practice within an educational setting like that?
Okay, so before coming to WashU, I was at Webster for like 16 years. And so that was the baseline of my higher ed work. And so the thing and I was a trauma therapist there as well. I was a sexual assault advocate there, and I serve in that role here as well, but I do general counseling as well at both universities I did. And so the difference, really, the only difference is that at Webster, I did undergraduate and graduate work. And of course, at WashU, at the med school, I have a variance of individuals. So I work with research students. I work with students who are medical students. I work with physical therapy students, occupational therapy, and what's called audiology or PACS. Those that work with the hearing impaired individuals. So the trauma that I'm working with individuals ranges. It ranges from incest. It ranges from community, things that have happened in the community to them. And it also ranges from racial disparities, individuals who are, experiencing racial discrimination, oppression, prejudice, and just really feeling like an outlier. And then I have individuals, of course, that have been sexually assaulted either in the past or more recently. So it's a variety of types of, a few people have had medical traumas, and that's really difficult if you've had a medical trauma and you're in medical school. So the trauma is a variance of trauma. When people hear the word trauma, they think one or two things. A physical trauma, or they were sexually assaulted. But there is so much on that continuum within that. The loss of children, the loss of, one lady had the loss of her nephew. And then at the funeral, they were, going through the process of grief and all of that. And then a year and a half later, she lost her mom. And then, because of COVID, I've actually lost 3 colleagues who either continued to work or they were exposed haphazardly, initially when this thing first started. So the trauma varies with this population.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's interesting to hear, like, especially when you said working with medical students and specifically to, when having to focus on medical trauma. I know that outside of WashU, I saw on your website, you seem to hold like a private practice in Clayton and offer volunteer services through local organizations. So how do you adapt your practice to fit those different, forms of therapy, whether through private practice, through, within a school, or through a pro bono service?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm trying to figure that out too. I'm still working on it. So I kind of make a delineation between, like, at the school, I work with within a specific time frame, and the issues particularly range around the same thing. Now, in the private practice, I see police officers, firemen, veterans. That's the pro bono work that I usually do, and I do some work with the YWCA and I think it's called Diamond Diva Diamond Diva. They do domestic violence work, and it's just a little work here and there. But my private practice really does focus on trauma, but it's general work. Once people start to come in, they start to realize that they've had some trauma, because a lot of people don't even realize it, and it comes out and you're like, oh my gosh, they're like, gosh, that has really affected me, and I didn't even realize that was going on, the loss of their mom or a relationship that they'd had. So hard question to answer because each one of them has their own specific needs, and now everybody is online. So now I'm doing telehealth for everyone, do EMDR, telehealth, DBT, prolonged exposure. So it really is, the lines are very thin. The ages are different. I never thought in my private practice that I would be seeing 10, 11, and 12-year-olds for just prolonged in 11 years of depression and anxiety, and mostly anxiety. So hard question to answer.
Of course, absolutely. Yeah, it's interesting you talk about, people not even knowing they have trauma. I guess I wonder in that sense, what's your view on really who should seek counseling? Is it people who are really dealing with either mental illness or trauma, or do you think that, everyone at some point in their life should seek therapy?
Most definitely the latter. Most everyone can, and even if it's just to gain some coping skills, because for a lot of people, a lot of the students on campus, it's not this drastic thing that has happened to them. It may be just dealing with some coping skills of how to handle stress. And stress can mask trauma oftentimes, but a majority of the people, not everyone that comes in has trauma. So it's general stuff: boyfriend problem, girlfriend problem, parents problem, and stress and anxiety. So yeah, anyone can come in for just about anything. Sometimes I'm just a big old ear. I just listen to people and we process a thing out, and they're like, "Oh, I figured it out." I don't get involved and entangled in it. It's just a safe place. So that's basically what, to me, therapy is for most of the people that I talk with and try to help navigate. It's just having a vessel, a safe vessel for them to come to, so that they can just feel nothing if they need to feel nothing for that day, or learn how to feel again somewhere safe.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's, really good advice. And I think a lot of other advice kind of related to that we've seen, especially during the pandemic, is telling people to talk to people, whether it's a friend or a family member or a life coach. How do you think counseling is different than other types of self-help?
Well, so, like, since I started out in addictions, and I know for sure that 12-step meetings or things like self-help and support, they really work. They've done the research shows it, and they've done cortisol levels, and they've done everything, and they found out that it was the connection. Polyvagal theory talks about the mirror neurons and a connection. So say the question again.
I was just wondering how therapy is different than other types of self-help, like life coaching or just talking with a friend.
So coaching helps you decipher either choices that you have, decisions that you make, and it does not go deeper into the why, and it doesn't offer you some of the skills that that traditional therapy might ask you, or you might go through. And what's interesting is many of the therapists are also getting the coaching license or certification as well, so that they can delineate, with other people, we're here for coaching to set specific goals that are, whether it's career or making choices on career. And then there are those that want counseling, that want to go more deeper into their emotions and understand what their emotions is, or they're recovering from something. That the difference is, going a little bit deeper into the emotions and trying to figure their life out, what has happened in the past and how that's affecting them now. Whereas the coaching kind of looks at a goal that they might want to achieve, and it's on a lighter note. It's not emotionally based at all. And sometimes it is, because I've talked to some coaches and I'm like, you're crossing the line, right? You're not a therapist.
Yeah, well, speaking of crossing the line, I'm curious what like some of your biggest ethical concerns are within the profession, whether that be conundrums that you have faced or ethical concerns you have about how other people practice counseling.
I think one of the major ones that I noticed, and then I have to not be careful of it, but be watchful of it, is the dual relationship. Especially with social media now, and clients thinking, oh yeah, I sent you a request for friendship, and in the paperwork, when they go in for counseling, it's like, we're not going to be friends. I'm here to service you, and this is a professional relationship, and it goes beyond a friendship. So I can't come to your party, I can't do that. So I would say, and I noticed a lot of people kind of crossing those lines in many different ways. And if you look at the statistics, the dual relationship violation is one of the number one thing that's violated. I think that one is a real conundrum for a lot of people. And as far as I think that would be the major one, because some of the other things, when you think about it, is people look at insurance, and people are very not knowledgeable about insurance, and they get themselves into trouble. But you can always ask a question. So I would think the dual relationship, and practicing beyond their scope. Oftentimes people will engage in practices that they're not trained in. Like I talked to two friends, and or two colleagues actually, and so they had never received any training on EMDR. They had watched a video, and so they didn't know the whole process or know how, but they watched a video, and so they said, yeah, I just did it. I just moved my hands and asked the person how they felt, and then we just went on from there. So they really weren't practicing, within their scope, because they had never had training in it. They didn't know what would happen. They just kind of did it, and so those two, I think, the dual relationship and practicing beyond their scope.
Definitely. And, many people in my class, since it is a class on counseling, are interested in possibly pursuing careers in counseling.
Mhm.
How do you see the profession changing in the future?
Well, it's already changed just in the last 18 to 20, 19 months, or wherever we are, is in more use of technology, more use and being more creative with using technology with our clients. For instance, with EMDR, there's a program called Remote EMDR. Now, you can still do bilateral stimulation with a client, but this Remote EMDR has a client sign in to a HIPAA compliant site, and you invite them into a HIPAA compliant site, and you can control the bilateral stimulation a little bit better. I think more reliance on technology, definitely changing. The therapist really honing in on being more trauma aware, because people oftentimes will think they're trauma aware, and because they say I'm trauma aware, they're trauma aware. More training on trauma, more attention to cultural, a culturally competent therapist, and making sure that individuals have cultural humility, that they're growing and understanding, not just aware, okay, this person's this person's that. It goes beyond that. And when you're doing your interview, making sure that you're receiving the information in a culturally competent way. So I say software, how we view culture, we pay attention to that. And yeah, I guess those three.
Definitely. Is there anything else that you wanted to add that I haven't asked you about?
I'm trying to think, because I teach a theories of counseling class at Pepperdine, and so I've had class last night and I have class tonight. And one of the major things is the first thing that people are worried about. They're practicing interviews, how to do interviews and what an interview is, and doing an interview. And the major concern is suicide. What can I do? What if I tell the person, the question that comes up or the thought comes up, what if I tell the person that they need to go to the hospital, or I contact the hospital and they don't need to, and they aren't suicidal? And I say, well, if you're working from competence and you are assessing their lethality, it is better to have a wrong, you're not admitting them to the hospital. You are, assessing their lethality. And so, so you don't have the power to enter them to the hospital, but you notice some symptoms that maybe they may need some more help. So that's a big fear. And, if clinicians could remember that they're not responsible for hospitalizing them, but they are aware to be competent enough to measure the lethality so that you can make sure that they can get an assessment at a hospital. So that's one thing that I noticed in the first couple of weeks that we're doing. They started just now. We're in our second week. So that's one thing that people worry about. What if my client commits suicide? What if I'm going to commit? And, the statistics shows that most people that do complete a suicide visited their therapist within that week and never said a word. So the one thing is to always ask about suicide. Do you have the means, and have you had thoughts or urges of ending your life, killing yourself, or committing suicide? I hate to end on that depressing note, but it is but it's a part of it. And you don't want to have your whole career worried about, oh my gosh, is this person going to kill themselves, or they're going to kill themselves? If you put everything in order as it should, and you assess each time, you're okay. And you remember that we're given free will. And if someone truly has those urges, no matter what you do as a clinician, that person may complete that, and that has nothing to do with you if you have acted competently.
Yeah, that is a really interesting statistic. I hadn't heard that before. And I think that is, a thing that prevents a lot of people, is just the weight of what you're doing. I'm sure that, really gets to people. Are there any ways, I guess, going off of that you, especially working with trauma, try to preserve your own mental health when, not basically taking the office home with you, to use the adage?
Initially I did, but I've learned self-care, cutting work off when it's time to cut off work, take vacations, take breaks. In the morning, I run every day, typically I run or walk every day before sessions. Like I'll start sessions sometimes at 8:15 or 9. Mondays, I don't start till 10 or 11, but I make sure that I get a good run in, 3 or 4 miles. And so my goal is 100 miles a month. And so to achieve that, I run in the morning sometimes, and I may walk in the afternoon, but I get my miles in, I take breaks, I meal prep. So taking care of yourself allows you not to get to the point where you're overwhelmed. But I will tell you, I see the work that I do is with healthcare professionals as well. And so all of us have been over inundated with clients, so many clients, and so much pain, and so much that we have to remind even the clinicians to make sure that you take care of yourself, get some exercise, get some sleep. So that's typically what I do. Now I have bad days and I have good days, like, oh my God, what a day. But then I replenish the well. I connect with other people, watch some funny movies, laugh, eat good food, and I run.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I think that's really impressive. 100 miles a month. I'm sure that is definitely helpful.
It adds up.
Yeah,
4 miles, 6 miles, 4 miles, 2 miles, 3, it adds up.
All right. Well, thank you again so much for speaking to me. This has been really interesting, and I really appreciate all your insights.
Thank you for asking me.
Okay, we're back, and the first thing that I would say is, like you, I absolutely am fascinated by the breadth of experience that Dr. Smith has, and how much that her experience in the military, and then also as a dancer. And I don't know if did she dance professionally, or was that just a hobby?
Yeah, I don't believe so, as far as we discussed, and I've read from her bios, but I think that was a really interesting thing to learn about, just because of how she uses kind of physical aspects in her therapy and semantic theories. I thought was really interesting. Like when she talked about, I asked her, what kind of is your orientation? How are you practicing? She talked about, obviously, kind of standard CBT, but really trying to include that type of semantic practice, I thought was really interesting. But yeah, I know she does some kind of like community, like yoga courses and things like that. So she's definitely doing a lot of like physical kind of therapy classes, but I don't think she's ever like performed professionally in that sense.
And that's one of the things that I don't know if people who are getting trained in psychology really appreciate. I mean, sure, in graduate school, we always talk about, talk to your clients about where they experience that emotion in their body. But there's a story that I've always heard about Einstein where he would say, people would say, hey, what's this theory really mean? And he would say, well, it's like if you have a scratch on your arm, but it's like on the inside and you can't really. And so we know that people connect their experiences and their understandings with somatic experiences in their body, but we really don't do a lot of that in psychotherapy. So hearing her talk about that was absolutely fascinating to me as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So when she was talking about how that somatic psychology kind of informed her practice, then she went into a bunch of labels and she talked about DBT, CBT, EMDR, 12-step, and prolonged exposure. So my hope is that now at this point, if you didn't know all of those acronyms before you came into the class, that you're familiar with them now. But I thought for the sake of the listener, let's go back and just talk about what those are. So DBT is dialectical behavior therapy. CBT is cognitive behavior therapy. EMDR is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. 12-step programs, I think a lot of people know what those are. And prolonged exposure, when I was in school, we used to call that systematic desensitization. The new term for that in psychology is exposure therapy, but it's a way of helping an individual sit with the anxiety of an anxiety-inducing stimulus for greater periods of time until they're able to really master that. So I really liked how you guys were talking about the difference between coaching and therapy, and I loved her answer about that, by the way. That was fantastic. There really isn't anything else that I would add to what she said. I think that was spot on. But then you guys went into the transition with ethics because she had said something that you picked up on, and I really, really thought that your transition with that was so flawless that I mean, I'm not even kidding, because I don't think that's a thing you can teach people. I think that's a thing that people either know how to do or they don't know how to do. But it is very much like therapy. Your client says something that you as a therapist follow up on, and yeah, hopefully that's, elucidating for them. It teaches them something and maybe they understand themselves better. But really it's about following the individual that you're working with and helping them, guiding them to find the answer that's already inside of them.
Yeah, I think that, I definitely did a lot of research and preparation going into this of, learning a lot about her background and also, trying to prepare as many questions as I could, because I think you never know, I didn't know going to the interview what it was going to be like. Was I going to be kind of stuck with, what am I going to ask next? So I think having those prepared, if I needed to reference them, was really helpful, and just to have them kind of in my brain. But I got so lucky with Dr. Smith because she was just such a great interview subject. She gave such thoughtful responses, which I really appreciated. And it made it so easy to have just a nice, flowing conversation with her. And I think, going into it, I thought I've done all the research and preparation I can, but the best way to make this good is just to really listen. I feel like it's so easy to ask a question and then kind of zone out and then ask your next question. So I think just staying as attentive as I could really helped create that conversational tone.
Which is also another important skill in therapy, is not to be trying to plan your next intervention, but to be listening to what the client is saying, because people can do that. They can get so wrapped up in the story that they're not tracking what's really important and what would be really beneficial for the client. But I would also add to that in my experience, I've been doing this now, I've been doing therapy for over 35 years. I've been doing my podcast now for more than 2 years. And in my experience, a good interviewer really helps an interviewee flow and be very conversational. And a bad interviewer, the opposite can happen. If you're just asking questions and you're not paying attention to the answers, then the person you're interviewing picks up on that, and they just kind of then start going back to prepackaged information that they already have in their brains. And you're right, it just sounds disjointed and not very informative.
Right, absolutely.
Well, Jaden, I appreciate you coming on the show. I appreciate the work that you did in the class. I don't know if therapy is a thing that you actually are interested in going in. It sounds to me like journalism or psychology would both be great avenues for you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, I think that I'm learning more and more about how much they overlap. Like just in doing this, of like doing an interview kind of has so much similarities. You know, you have to listen and create a conversation between, you know, journalistic interviewing and therapy. So I definitely think those are really exciting things to explore.
Well, thank you again for being on the show. As always, if you want to follow us, you can follow us on Twitter at Psych with Mike. You can follow us on Facebook at Psych with Mike. The music that appears in Psych with Mike is written and performed by Mr. Benjamin DeClue. And as always, if it's Friday, it's Psych with Mike. Okay, so